Chapter 4 is meant to be something that just kind of wets your whistle, just introduces a lot of these issues. So the last issue that we're going to talk about is essentially international trade and globalism. So national economies are becoming increasingly interdependent. So we know what independence is, right? Independence Day, great movie. We know, it's you're an island, right? So essentially, no country is an island, right? There's a lot of give and take in the form of buying and selling goods and services. So whenever we buy goods and services abroad, these are called imports. The things that we sell are exports. And it hasn't always been this way. If we look back over time, do a crude approximation of the graph in the book here. If we look at exports as a percentage of GDP, or imports, again, as a percentage of GDP, so the fraction that it is. So if we have blue be exports and red be imports, just like the book. So it starts off at 6 back in 1929. And it kind of does something like this. And, gets to a high around 20% back in the late 2000s, or maybe 18% rather. And it's been, chilling around the 10 to 14% area for a while here. So these are our imports, right? These are the things that we are buying from abroad. So all of our clothing, all of our shoes, all the plastic stuff, some of our food, right? Avocados that come from Mexico, those are imports. Exports have, for the most part, followed with imports, not always. And, lately have been really, about 2 or 3 percentage points lower than the imports. What are our exports? So there is this neat World Trade Bank analysis here. Let me switch over for you guys. Oh, I got the recording over here. Okay, I guess I'll just do it over on this one. So we'll go to and I want visualization. So let's take a look. United States at a glance. Oh, that's not what I wanted. I want the visualization. This gives us the number of products we import, the number of partners, right? So 223, pretty much the rest of the world. Here's our, as a percentage of GDP in 2019, was 15%, latest data. and it was 12% our exports, right? So again, what are we running? What's it called when our imports are greater than our exports? Trade deficit. Hearing some people whisper it. Yep, trade deficit. So if our exports were greater than our imports, so if we were selling more than we were bringing in, that would be a trade surplus. We would be getting more in terms of international trade than we would be losing. So the buying minus the selling minus the buying is how we calculate that. So exports minus imports. So let's go back here. I saw it down here, this cool simulation. Oh, it was a featured guy. Boop. All right. So one of the main things that we export as the United States is entertainment, right? The Marvel movies and everything, right? It's like $2 billion internationally per movie or something, right? I mean, that's all part of our exports, right? When people purchase those movies, when those have box office releases internationally, that's all part of our exports, right? There's actually been some interesting news as of late in terms of Hollywood movies and American movies are having a really hard time getting into the Chinese box offices lately. Of course, part of it has to do with politics and their censorship, but it's gonna end up having a real bottom line impact on U.S. exports, right? So let's take a look at all of the things. So this is the United Kingdom. So let's go ahead and look at United States, because we are not Britain. So this is all of our imports. So transportation, right? This is a lot of different cars and things like that, right? Fuels, gases, natural gas, anything like that. We've got footwear, right? We've got stone and glass. We've got plastic and rubber. 3% of it's food. A lot of clothing. We've got metals. We've got chemicals, right? So a lot of the chemicals that we use to make fertilizer and a lot of the chemicals we use to make drugs come from abroad, right? Hides and skins are even 0.5%. Minerals, some animal, right? Some cows and stuff, some wood, some vegetables. So kind of the stuff that you would expect. And then if we take a look at our exports, maybe refresh. So now we find that we are exporting a lot of machinery and electric things, right? So I don't know where exactly armaments show up in here, but one of our biggest exports, our largest exports, I think it's like 4%, is guns and other kind of equipment and things like that. We sell a lot of cars abroad. We are fuel exporters, right? With all the fracking and all of the other kind of shale and other kind of oil extraction activity we're doing. Miscellaneous. This is probably the entertainment side of it. Got chemicals, so we're both importing and exporting a lot of the same things, right? Plastic and rubber, metals, vegetables, food products, animals, minerals, wood. So there's different parts of the supply chain are coming in and leaving the United States, right? So it's an interconnected global supply chain is kind of the at the end of the day what's going on here. And so there's many different things that we're importing and exporting. And at the end of the day, trade deficits and trade surpluses. So let's go ahead and put some definitions there. So trade deficit is when my exports are less than my imports. Trade surplus is the opposite, when my exports are greater than my imports. So one of the popular things that you'll hear a lot about, the rise of trade, right, is that it's displaced a lot of jobs. So we talk about, outsourcing, right? So a lot of things that used to be produced in America, a lot of jobs that used to be in America are now in China or in India or in other places, right? So specifically the textile industry, right, clothing and things like that, but also, the metal industry and to a certain degree, the food industry, right? So what we find is that these trade agreements end up with lower prices for everybody at the expense of these certain people's losing their jobs, right? And having to retrain into something else. And so there's a little bit of, isolated or specific negative impacts, but a general positive impact for everybody writ large. And so eventually we find that this kind of outsourcing and stuff, when properly handled, is not a bad thing and can really help your economy to grow in healthy ways. And so as a result, having trade deficits or having trade surpluses, neither one of these is inherently good or bad. It is circumstantial upon what's happening with the country, where they're at in their development, and what their goals are. So one of the main reasons why running a trade deficit would be difficult for as long as we've been running a trade deficit, right, since this point here, which was 79. So that's been a long time, right? That's been 40 years. So the issue with other countries running a trade deficit that long is that in order to buy things, you need to have the other country's money. You need to be able to purchase the other country's money or have some on hand. And so essentially, if you were not the United States, you would have run out of foreign currency and run out of dollars, because every year you are using more dollars to buy international goods than you're getting when you sell international goods. So anytime you export things, you're getting dollars. Anytime you import things, you're losing dollars. And so these other countries who, may have exchange rates that fluctuate, right? We just looked and, may have price levels that are fluctuating, can't afford to every year be able to, draw down on their dollar, what are called reserves. So because we are the international currency, so we enjoy what's called, what Charles de Gaulle dubbed in the 70s as our exorbitant privilege. The United States has the exorbitant privilege that we can run trade deficits and government deficits indefinitely with no consequence. So our prices don't rise tremendously because of it, which would happen to a similar country that was doing it, and our exchange rate, is fairly stable. I mean, our exchange rate is the denominator upon which all the other exchange rates are measured. So essentially, it's the fixed point in space. It's the random fixed point in space that everything else is comparing to. All right, so a bit esoteric, so let's get back to some notes. So what are the major macro issues? So, the beginning of this class, right, we talked about the distinction between macro and micro. Micro is the study of the firm, is the study of the individual region or the individual person, right? Whereas macro is the bird's eye view. So you're losing finer details so that you can have a broader scope, right? And so when we're looking, the macro issues that we were really concerned about are economic growth. What does it mean for an economy to grow? What does that look like? How do we make that happen? What's the, what's the soil and sunlight and fertilizer and air that is necessary, right? To use an agricultural metaphor, for the economy to blossom and grow and bear fruit, right? And so along with this, we have living standards. What good is the economy growing if the things that we enjoy, the things that protect us, the things that make us feel safe, the things that make us healthier are not also improving, that we're not also improving our access to them, right? So secondly, We're focused on productivity, right? How much national output is produced by any given worker, right? So we talked about this last time, and we talked about how, despite the fact that China is the world's largest economy, they're still lagging behind us in terms of their per worker productivity, right? Having to do with both, capital deficiencies and human capital, right? Educational attainment deficiencies there, right? Which they're working on, but they're still there nonetheless. So when things are bad, and when people are getting fired, and when the stock market's going down, and places are closing, right? These are called recessions. So we care about recessions in economics, right? We also care about expansions, which is just what you think, right? Which is when businesses are being birthed, right? Businesses are being expanded. There's new hiring. There's new franchises that are opening. There's new, sectors that are being created. We've got unemployment. Are the people that are out there that are trained, are they able to find a job that's fulfilling to them, that's paying them a good wage, that's providing them opportunities to grow and succeed and develop? The inflation rate, what's going on with prices, right? So just like we saw in that movie earlier, right? Why do we care about that? Well, it eats away at the purchasing power of our disposable income. It also eats away at our salaries. So inflation is something we got to keep an eye on, because it'll creep up on us, and all of a sudden, things cost twice as much. We're not getting paid twice as much. So we're able to enjoy half of the goods and services that we were able to enjoy before. So that's no good. And the last thing, right, which we just talked about, is the economic interdependence. Among nations. And this is even between us and nations that we have supposedly blockaded and things, right? We still sell Hummers and other kind of things like that to North Korea, and then they strap guns onto them and stuff, right? There is still trade relations even with these very strained political relations throughout the world. And in fact, that's really one of the defining notions or defining kind of central tenets of the global kind of policy that's been in place since World War II, which is if we get everybody to trade with each other enough, they'll be so dependent on each other, they won't go to war and blow the hell out of each other again. It's kind of worked. Kind of. The last 20 years has kind of begged differently, right? But story talk for another day. So economics and policy specifically, right? So there are two types, we're going to talk about three types of policies. So the first type of macro policy that we're going to talk about is what's called monetary policy. So again, we kind of learned a little bit about this in the video, right? Monetarists are these people that are very strict about not increasing the interest rate, not letting the prices increase at all, and that any interest rate increase or decrease is going to have a negative impact on the market. So monetary policy is the determination of the nation's money supply. And so this is something that's not controlled by our elected representatives. It's not something that we vote for, like the Senate and the House, or the our local judges or the president, right? This is controlled by a private but government oversight, so government controlled entity. So again, it's a private entity. It's not part of the public system, but its board of directors are chosen and appointed by our elected officials. So the people in charge. Oh, sorry, I should finish this. Called a central bank. And so it's just that. It's the bank that is at the center of all of the individual banks, right? So if your bank runs out of money, it sends a quick wire to the central bank and says, hey, I need a little loan for like 2 days. And the central bank's like, okay, here you go. That's going to be like 0.05%, whatever, right? So the central bank has a lot of different functions. The one that we're going to talk about right now is their determination, their control over the money supply. And really, that's somewhat of an antiquated notion. The video has it better. They really control or influence, right? Because you can't control something like this. They influence the base interest rate. And so these people in charge are appointed and held accountable by the president and Congress, respectively. So they're appointed by the president, they're held accountable by Congress, right? You'll see the head of the Federal Reserve or the board of the Federal Reserve be called up in front of Congress for questioning. They can't really give them commands of what to do, but they can express their concerns, they can advocate for different policies. But these institutions, these central banks, are meant to be outside of our political process. So why do we think that they're meant to be outside of the political process? So they talked in the video about money printing, right? So this is an issue in Greece. I spent 2 summers or 3 summers ago in Greece. And everywhere you go, there are these, it's like it's like a Monopoly Man graffiti thing, and it's talking, and it's got like, I think it's like Eurozone's taking money away from Greece because Greece entered the Eurozone, and they ended up kind of getting a bad deal out of it. And so the monthly income in Greece is like 450 euros, and the monthly rent average is like 700 euros. So like they can't afford to live there, right? So the inflation has increased, and the wages have not followed. And part of that is because essentially they gave away their monetary policy when they joined the European Union. Talk about that later. But the part of it I want to talk about right now is that they have rampant, government spending. They'll go and they'll just hire people, just a whole district of people. They'll hire all of them in order to get that district to vote for them. And there are some people that have government jobs there that have shown up once and never shown up again and collect a paycheck forever. So you end up having this government job, and then you have another job on top of it, and you get this paycheck from the government job too. So in a way, monetary policy can be like that in terms of if it was in the hands of the politicians, they could use monetary policy to ply the masses with cheaper interest rates for boats and houses and all this other kind of stuff right before elections and things like that, right? So that you end up voting the people that were in the White House or Congress or whatever back in. So we remove it from the political process by having it be this private entity. Now, there are arguments against having it be a private entity. But at the end of the day, if you look at the actions of the Federal Reserve and a lot of the other central banks, they have been benevolent. So it is a system of accountability that is working. So they are really, the book talks about how they inject money, whatever, but honestly, they are controlling or influencing those interest rates, which impact a variety of large ticket decisions, right? Buying a house, car, boat, whatever. So by lowering the interest rates, you will stimulate economic demand. And we'll talk about what exactly does that mean in chapter 5, what economic demand is and how we measure it and why that would stimulate it. So our second policy that we're going to talk about today is fiscal policy. So I just talked about fiscal policy when I was talking about Greece. I was talking about their runaway, rampant, corrupt fiscal policies where they just hire all the people. They're like, oh, this district, I'm losing in this district. I'm just going to hire 10,000 people from that district in order to get them to like me and vote for me. And it works. And then those people have jobs for life. It's very, very strange. So fiscal policy is government spending. So fiscal policy is, how much, where, on what, answers those questions, right? So post-2008, the financial recession in 2008, there was a American Recovery, ARRA, America Rebuilding and Recovery Act? Oh, I can't even remember anymore. But I do remember that it gave me so there was this job that was created because of that money. So that money, that act provided, stimulus money to businesses to create jobs and to hire people at higher wages. And so I ended up getting a job as the assistant to the graduate editorial office at the University of Florida, making like $3 more an hour than I was making before because of this ARRA. So this fiscal policy, so that it was this government act that was, meant to inject money and jobs into the economy to help us get out of that recession that was in 2008 that y'all probably don't remember. So this is also, so this is, discretionary spending, right? So this is also, the COVID spending, right? That would come under fiscal policy, right? So all the COVID-19, paychecks, whatever we're going to call them, the free money, the increase in the child tax credit, all that kind of stuff is all fiscal policy. And then the last one we're going to talk about, which is kind of, a distant cousin of fiscal policy because they're both born under the same house, is structural policy. If I can find it. So structural policy. And so this is aimed at changing the underlying structure or institutions, there's that word again, of the nation's economy. So structural policy hopes to remake basic characteristics. So this is like, in the United States, we have bankruptcy laws, right? If you, have a business or you go into a bunch of debt and you can't get out of all that debt and you have no job, you can file for bankruptcy. You can start over. You have to hit on your record, your credit or whatever, right? But, after 7 years, it goes away. You can build up your credit. It's not a big deal. The EU does not have this. And one of my good friends wrote his dissertation on how, he believes that's part of the reason why, small business growth and entrepreneurship and innovation is really stifled in the Eurozone compared to the United States. Because in the United States, you can take a big risk and lose it all and then wipe it all clean and start over. You can't do that in every other country, right? That's a structural policy that we have in place. So economics at the end of the day is about, or macroeconomics at the end of the day rather, is about aggregation. What do I mean by aggregation? All these jargony terms, right? Aggregation. So aggregation, you may have remembered, is like, it's summation, right? It's the adding up of individual economic variables to obtain economy-wide totals. And so we have to aggregate in order to have this bird's eye view, in order to see the system as a whole. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to aggregation, right? And so the book has this great example 4.3, which talks about a national crime index. So we want to know what's going on with, this problem that's really partly economic, right? Essentially when unemployment's high, there's more crime, right? If people don't have jobs, if they're broke, there's going to be more crime. They're going to be more frustrated. They're going to, steal more things. They're going to, lash out, right? Just in general, they're just going to be more of an exposed nerve. And so it's this partly economic problem. And so to figure out in general what's happening with crime, right, we go to our statistics, and we know that police keep data or records of the crimes in their jurisdictions. But if we literally just looked at every single, all of that stuff, right, that would be a million papers, right, stacks and reams of papers of all the different, okay, there were 17 thefts in Chadron during this time. There were, 1,000 thefts in Scottsbluff during this time. There was 5 murders or whatever, you know what I mean? So how do we take all of this data and crunch it down into a few terms, or ideally just one number, right? And so what they do, in specifically the FBI, right, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, they aggregate all of these to obtain national crime rates. And so these are the number of serious crimes. So they define serious crimes by both violent and by property crimes, right? So theft and breaking in and arson and things like that. And so we found that in 2015, there were 9.2 million serious crimes in the US. And so these are typically expressed number of serious crimes per 100,000 population. And so how do we get that with this number? Well, we take 9.2, we divide it by the population in 2015, which was 321 million. And then we multiply that by 100,000. We multiply this fraction by 100,000. And so we end up with a number that is 2,860 crimes. There's a reason why we're doing this. I know it's a lot of numbers. Crimes per 100,000 population, people. And so this rate was a substantial drop from the 2010 values of 4,100 crimes per 100,000 people. So in general, right, if we talk about aggregation, we would say that crime went down, right? That these policies have been reducing serious crime. That's the big picture, right? But the big picture can obscure minor details. So the FBI is lumping together serious crimes, very serious crimes, such as murder and rape, with, serious crimes, but not as serious, right? Most people would agree that murder and rape do far more damage than, typical theft. And so, although the crime rate fell by 30%, that 4,100 to the 2,860 is 30%, the murder rate fell by less than 12%. Since murder is the most serious of crimes, you could say that the crime rate is actually understating the problem, right? The reduction in crime was less significant than the changes in the overall crime, than the changes that the overall crime rate indicates. And additionally, well, I don't want to confuse it all anymore. So that's one of the reasons why aggregation can be problematic. All right, let's go ahead and start chapter 5 in our last 5 minutes here. So this is GDP, gross domestic product. Why is it gross? Does it smell? No, it's gross because it's talking about the total value rather than the net, right? The net is usually a term when we subtract something, right? Net profit is when we take the total revenue and we subtract all of the costs. So our gross domestic GDP, otherwise known as GDP, it's the market value of the final goods and services that are produced in a country in a period of time, almost always a year. So, how do we add up grains of wheat and, movie ticket sales and, other kinds of things that we're producing as the United States? Well, we have to use their dollar value, or what's called their market value. So the market value is just that. It is the price, the selling price of goods and services on the market. So an example of this, right? The book talks about this fake society called Orcadia. And Arcadia produces apples, bananas, and shoes. And we're given individual prices and individual quantities. This will be the last thing, I swear. And so we're told that the apples are all 25 cents each, the bananas are 50 cents each, and the shoes are 20 bucks a pop. We're told that Arcadia produces, remember this is all production, right? Arcadia produces 4 apples, 6 bananas, and 3 shoes. So what's the individual GDP contribution for each one of these sectors of Arcadia? We're literally just multiplying, right? So $1 here, $3 here, $60 here. So our total GDP for Arcadia is $64. All right, we'll pick up here in class on Wednesday. And if you have any questions, make an appointment with me in office hours, come to office hours, send me an email. Hope you have a great rest of your week, or beginning of your week.